Hello and welcome to Live from America podcast, one of the Comedy Sellers podcast. This is Hatem. Noam Dworman is on vacation out of the country, enjoying his time. But hosting for him is Boris Khaykin, comedian and good friend. Hello,
Hello,
Boris.
hello.
Good to
I
see
think
you.
I can be an okay stand-in gnome.
No one can be Noam.
I just gotta yell at our guest a lot.
You have to yell and interrupt and no, and
Well,
make
I'm
the
happy.
point.
I'm happy there won't be a yelling today.
And our guest of honor is Carl Unegbu. I'm sorry for mispronouncing it. Um,
Can
Carl
write it
is a
down.
lawyer and a journalist. He's currently runs the allcarlslaw.com, very good website. He's the editor, and he formerly was running the comedybeat.com. He have a very interesting book that we're gonna discuss a lot, and I think it's very important these days. And it's like as soon as I saw, I was like, "Oh, this is something that we have to discuss these days." Comedy goes to court. Comedy goes to court when people stop laughing and start fighting. Carl, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm so honored to be able to join you guys.
You also you studied at Columbia University for journalism and then in my University of Miami as a lawyer for the law,
Yes, sir.
right? Yeah.
So,
So yeah, so tell us. So this is an important comment because as Boris knows, all the comedians get in a lot of trouble, all entertaining. Like I think it used to be back in the day with lawsuits and stuff like that with everybody. They used to be like, oh, if something happened, also now people look for lawsuits in every level, like businesses. Like I have people, friends that own restaurants, and their employees are constantly contacted by lawyers. Like, hey, I could do this for you. I could do this for you. Same thing with comedy. Same thing. Somebody like TMZ is based on like breaking news and like, oh shit, somebody's losing their temper or whatever. So a lot of people like start looking for when somebody says something is like to cancel them, the new term, or not new, but or to get them in trouble. So this is why I think it's very good to understand. And it's funny enough, I have a friend of our friend Lou Perez was just asking me before the show. I was like, hey, I need he's making this show and he need a good lawyer to make sure that he secure himself. I was like, oh, I have the perfect guest to ask. So, Carl, first, how did you get into comedy and and then writing this book? How did this whole thing started?
so thanks for having me. And this is such a privilege. I mean, there's no other place I'd rather be talking about this book than the world famous comedy seller. But my journey to comedy, at first, I mean, I was just, somebody who initially looked at comedy from the outside, like folks who are not practicing comedians, so to speak. Then when I got to Columbia, when I was in school studying journalism, that was my first, foray into uh, comedy writing, because not comedy writing in the sense of like writing for a show, but, commentaries on comedy. So my first brush with that was when I submitted that for a class assignment, like as a student. So I went to some comedy club and, like covered what was happening. Some comics were performing. I think it may have been like some open mic kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I covered that. I thought that was interesting. So I covered that, submitted that for a class. And then, subsequently, I returned, just took in shows, not necessarily writing about them for class, but just, enjoying the shows. So anyway, but that was the first time that I really took a formal interest in writing about comedy, making those kinds of commentaries. Uh, then down the road after graduation, when I started to practice law, I had some colleagues of mine from way back in school, they came up with this idea of wanting to start a website, to cover like news concerning comedy. And then it kind of brought me back to, I kind of rediscovered my interest in comedy. So that was how I decided to like, yeah, step over onto the other lane because I was practicing law. So I stepped onto the other lane to co-found to co-found that website as an editor and reporter. And so at that point, we began to really cover comedy. Previously, I had worked for a real estate publication as a reporter. I mean, if you know New York City, there's this publication called The Real Deal. Yes,
Okay.
So I did that, and then I did freelance journalism. So those were my things before I formally entered the comedy space from a journalistic point of view.
Okay. So Robert, Boris, for you, like as a comedian, when you start, obviously one of the things I always know is like with social media, with paperwork, with stuff like that, comedians, they don't want to care about this shit, right? Like you don't want to post, you don't want to, but you have to protect yourself. So what was like when you first started comedy? You've been doing comedy for a while now. So when you started comedy, what was did you get into any legal issues like contracts, people not paying you, or like whatever, anything that legally
I've had like minor squabbles where like because New York, you get a lot of weird like media companies have like net 60, net 90 like payments where they'll give themselves 90 days after you complete a job to pay on a freelance invoice. And then the ones that'll do something like net 90 usually won't pay you within 90 days either. You'll have to like email them and threaten a couple things. I've threatened one company with there's a specific company with like I just looked up language to use that like I don't actually know what I'm talking about, but I'd be like, I'm going to report it to the district attorney and the New York whatever. And then, they'll pay up usually in that case. But otherwise, nothing too crazy. The closest I had was I had a job not that long ago where they needed to do a background check and they do a social media scan. And I love it because most of the time they're not actually going to like not hire you because of it. But what you get is you get a beautiful, like 13-page document of all the tweets and Facebook posts that they found flagged for sexual conduct, for threats of violence. They're all jokes. But it's great because it's just I'm like, oh yeah, that was hilarious. I remember when I posted that. It's just a nice little 13-page document of some of my funniest tweets and posts that they remind me of. Sometimes they'll ask you to take stuff down. I haven't had to deal with that, but I know people who have been asked to take stuff down. And I'm sure that was, some of them did it. Some of them probably refused. Thankfully, this last gig, they didn't make me take anything down, but they sent me a nice document of all the like 28 posts or whatever it was that they found concerning.
Yeah, but not only about that, I have some people that co-wrote stuff, and then when it was sold to a big network, they said, "Oh no, you're not part of this anymore," stuff like that. So, but here's the thing, which to Carl is like, I see a lot of people, especially with the comedians. First thing you look for is a manager, an agent. I never hear anybody say, "Hey, I want a lawyer,"
And that's where the problem is. Frankly, initially, they didn't need to have to get a lawyer because it was a different time from one generation ago to where we are now. What I am talking about, this is a new phenomenon that kind of broke onto the scene maybe in just the past 2 decades and a half tops. Let's say from 2000 toward the present time. That was when this phenomenon of lawsuits as part of sort of a cost of doing business in the comedy space, began to take hold. Where, for me, it was like one of those situations where you go in to looking for one thing, and then you go in there and you discover that there's something else that is there now on the scene that wasn't there before. So for me, it's like I went into when I was an editor at Comedybeat, I went into comedy to cover the fun and games of comedy. But then I discovered that now there is this awkward interaction increasingly between comedy and the law, with lawsuits and those kinds of things, following comedians and becoming like a factor in their lives, something they
Can you give an example of like what lawsuits comedians could face?
Oh, tons. Either you could face a lawsuit either at the beginning, like the contract, how you made the contract, for instance, or maybe trying to get paid. I mean, I have in the book here, oh, by the way, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Comedy goes to court when people stop laughing and start fighting. So, yeah. So, I mean, I have a whole, like, about 7 chapters here. Beginning, it's like a 360 degree with respect to the life of a comedian, beginning from like how you even start the work, the contract, the agreement to begin the work. That's the first chapter, which is called Hashing Out the Deal for Comedy Work. And here I have all this coverage about lawsuits involving, like folks like Howard Stern, folks like John Lovis, Dave Chappelle, Gary Shandling, so these are suits that they were, even Conan O'Brien. So
Could
these
you
were suits.
elaborate? Could you
Yeah, like,
elaborate more on like, because obviously, contracts, that's been around for a long time in terms of getting shafted with a contract or like not knowing what you're signing. What do you mean though by what's new in the past like 25 years? Do you mean like with like the way that like Netflix and like things like that in terms of streaming, or is there something else that's new?
that too. Well, if you're talking about the contract, mostly it will be contracts with many of these companies, that hire comedians to perform something, either say maybe Netflix or maybe some important comedy club or some venue, that presents comedy shows. So yeah, you have to like make sure that the deal itself is structured in a way that there is no confusion. Like one example I used to give is like when you try to structure the deal, and let's say you want to go from point A to point B, maybe for folks who live in New York, you want to go from Times Square to say Grand Central. Maybe they are gonna charge you $50 to do that. If you get there within the hour, okay. And then if somebody who is not part of the deal says, well, okay, so if you get there within the hour, it will be $50. What if you have some traffic situation that holds you up and you don't get there until 2 hours? Would it still be $50? Well, if both of you don't agree on the same answer, then you have a lawsuit in your future. You understand? That kind of rule of thumb.
So
well, like practically, I'm not sure if I follow. Practically speaking, like, what's a good example, or maybe there's a real example of a lawsuit that you wouldn't see 25 years ago that you would see today?
Oh, there are laws like so that's the first one. Then there's this big thing with then the next big chapter here is like free speech, right? That's a huge area where people get sued every day. Like just one generation ago, if you made a joke about, let's say, Mitt Romney and if you talked about, say, he's like the suit they filed, somebody filed against Jay Leno, one of the suits that I discussed there. He made a joke about how Mitt Romney's money, where he lived was so opulent that it kind of looked like some Indian temple, the temple of Amritsar, some very shiny, glazy temple there. And then some Indian American guy from Los Angeles sued him, that he was defaming, Indian Americans and all that stuff. So, I mean, one generation ago, it would have been like, oh, this is just comedy, folks joking around. But today, these things can actually get you in a courtroom. Or when he made another joke, he brought some guys to his show who talked about some flight attendant who was smuggling, they made the joke that she was smuggling rabbits onto the plane in her underwear. So they kind of made jokes about, oh, she likes things that crawl around and, stuff like, Jim Norton was on the show. So they got sued, but again, these are suits that don't amount to much, but they are filed today increasingly. Some are frivolous, but they are there. Just because they are frivolous doesn't mean they won't cost you days and times in court and money to get lawyers.
So I feel like that some of these suits like are inevitable. Like it's gonna happen. Is it gonna affect you? Like without like do you have to respond to them? I mean, I understand the stress part of it, maybe it's a little time, but do you actually have to respond to that?
You do have to, like the lawsuit against John Oliver by this coal industry billionaire, a guy named Robert Murray, who owns, the biggest coal company in the country. So this was something from 2017 when Oliver was knocking the Trump administration. They were having all this big talk about reviving the coal industry and stuff. And then they had, as part of that whole effort, they had this billionaire, come testify before Congress, like giving a prop to those programs. Now, Oliver takes a shot at them in one of his episodes. He was criticizing the administration, and then he took a shot at this billionaire. This was a billionaire who, I think back in 2017, back in 2007, sorry, there was an explosion somewhere in Utah at the mine that killed like about 9 people. And then there were issues about, well, what was the cause of this explosion? So this billionaire said, well, look, it was an earthquake. But Oliver said no, that there was a government report that said it was because of sloppy, precautions at the mine. So there was that disagreement there. Then Oliver also said, that the guy was some geriatric or Dr. Evil, all that stuff. So this guy, before the show ran, he called them and said, look, we believe this is defamation, it's false. If you run this episode with us in this way, we are going to sue you. We are going to sue you. Well, Oliver being Oliver, he said that before he said that
in the monologue. Yeah,
that, he's been threatened with a cease and desist, that he's going to run the thing anyway. So he ran the episode, and lo and behold, he got sued.
So that one sounds like, I mean, I don't feel terrible only because like it sounds like a dumb lawsuit. I'm guessing Oliver has the financial means and HBO has the financial means
now that's
to
the
fight
problem.
that stuff.
Now you put your finger on something big. You put your finger on something really big. So the suit ended early, right? He won big time, easy.
John Oliver won.
Obviously.
Right.
Obviously. I mean, a comedian has so many ways of winning. First of all, it's very difficult to win against a comedian with these suits. It's difficult. There are
because
few
of free
only
speech.
cases. Huh?
Because Second Amendment, free speech.
Fourth Amendment, yeah. So it's not
Fourth,
easy to
sorry.
win against comedians with that kind of lawsuit. But the problem is not even to win necessarily. It's the whole, sometimes they file these lawsuits as strategic attempts to like shut the comedian up. So Oliver won this lawsuit easily, but before he won the suit, at the very early stages, he had paid over $200,000 to lawyers up until that point. Plus, his liable insurance went up like more than by 300%. So these are part of the thing. I mean, this billionaire wasn't looking to win the suit. He knew that it was a joke. The suit was, crazy stuff that was gonna get dismissed. But it was a strategic thing. And it kind of looks like what Donald Trump did with Bill Maher when he sued him. When Bill Maher said, look, if Donald Trump could produce his birth certificate to show that he wasn't the son of an orange orangutan and some woman, a human woman, that he would give him $5 million. He said that Donald Trump's hair, the color of his hair and the color of an orange orangutan were the two things in nature of the same color, that kind of thing. So he said all of that on Jay Leno's show. Then he said, first of all, the backstory here is, I don't know if you remember when Trump was saying that Barack Obama wasn't born in this country.
Mm-hmm.
That whole birther conspiracy thing. When he said, well, if Obama could produce his birth certificate to show he was born in this country, that he would give him $5 million, that kind of thing. So Maher turned the thing around on Trump and said, well, look, if you could show that you are not the son of an orange orangutan and a woman, I'll give you $5 million. So it was all in the context of a joke, a national joke. Well, so the following week, Donald Trump sues him, said, look, this is my birth certificate. I was born in Queens, so pay me $5 million. That's the deal. Well, look, that lawsuit wasn't going to go anywhere. But so on April Fool's Day, 2013, he withdraws the lawsuit, threatening to he's going to refile the thing. But that wasn't the point. The point was a strategic lawsuit again to
So you're saying that some people will take a chance just to either get recognition or to take a comedian out or stuff like that if they have the means.
In the case of John Oliver, that sounds like actual damages with his insurance going up and stuff. Could he countersue to cover those damages?
Well, this is America. There are too many lawyers out there. You could sue. You could literally sue about anything.
You
First
say
of all,
that as someone who became a lawyer.
it's
Way
true.
to add to the problem.
No, but seriously, I mean, you could be sued for anything in America. This society is addicted to lawsuits. So, and it's part of the problem for comedy, because here's the context here. Comedy today is a big deal. It's not like one generation ago when if you told your parents you wanted to become a comedian, they might try to discourage you, say, come on, do something that maybe actually gets you paid, go be a lawyer, go be a teacher. That one generation ago, it was all just a joke, fun and games. Today, comedy has become a big thing, has come into its own. It's a way now that you could make a living.
Yeah.
So, and then apart from that, so there's fame and fortune to be had from comedy today, unlike before. And then comedy now also has a bigger footprint on the pop culture, like the conversation today, comedians play a very big, especially political comedy.
Yeah, I think one of the important things is that maybe we need to discuss is, comedians lose jobs because of things that they say outside of, like social media, outside of the company that hired them. Like, and not only comedians, a lot of other people. Like now with the political, division between and everything. Not only Trump and Biden before, but Palestine, Israel. All that. You say one thing, you can lose his job. Same thing with comedians. Like there's how many people that were fired that we know from SNL, Saturday Night Live, because of the after they get. So how can they protect themselves, or how can anybody protect themselves? Is it protected in general, or do you need a contract, say like, or can you put, like, I see a lot of people putting disclaimers on like the social media, like opinions are my own and stuff like that. Like, what would be the steps that people need to take, comedians specifically, to protect themselves from losing jobs because of where they stand or who they, stand for, or what they stand for and stuff like that?
First of all, comedians are citizens just like any other citizen. There is no greater protection for comedians from getting sued than for the school teacher, who could get sued or who could get fired from their jobs or something. Obviously, if you get fired outside the provisions of the contract, if you have a contract entitling you to some protections.
Well, that's what I meant. What should you do in your contract? Like, what should you add when you negotiate to protect you from stuff like that?
Well, there is freedom of contract. If you could say, for instance, you cannot be fired. You can stipulate to be able to get fired only for cause. Cause means there has to be some real, tangible, concrete reason for you to get fired that relates to the job itself, especially the performance. If you are not able to perform the contract, then you could get, that could then become something for cause. Or if you conduct yourself in a manner that damages the service or the product, that makes people not want to associate, with that program or something, that some kind of moral clause and all that. So you could like stipulate that you can only be fired for cause, something that amounts to like a real, tangible thing, not because somebody didn't like what you said about politics, about Gaza, or about some issue. Let's say the abortion ruling in Alabama the other day. Some of that kind of stuff, things you do on your own time. Yeah, so I mean, this, unfortunately, there is freedom of contract. If you can get it into the contract, that's fine. But most employers probably, some employers may not go with you to like stipulate for cause. A lot of times they say it's at will.
Yeah.
And at will protects you because the comedian can also walk away. If he doesn't like the setup, he's not going to get boxed into the deal. Because there is something they call when you are a comedian and you are hired to perform, one, you're an independent contractor. Two, it's also a contract of personal service. Nobody can compel an employer to associate with an employee that they don't want to associate with. So having that kind of contract of personal service is not like a contract to buy land. If I contract to sell you land and you don't want to go along with the contract, I could get an order from the court forcing you to sell the land to me. But you cannot force somebody to keep a servant on that they don't want to keep on because it's a contract of personal service. You understand?
Yeah.
So comedy is sort of like that. So again, like I said, you want to stipulate in the contract, as they say, good job if you can get it. So you can try to stipulate whatever you want to stipulate, but if the other side agrees, that's fine. But
most likely they won't agree.
Yeah, mostly a lot of times, if you just want to do a gig or something, they make it a contract of, an at-will contract. But if it's like a contract where you want to, let's say, with Howard Stern and Sirius Satellite, Sirius SM, sorry, where there's a contract for, a number of years. And then, one of the cases I discussed there was, okay, let's say if you increase the viewership of the thing by a certain amount of people, you get this much. Okay, well, what if you increase that number by simply a merger instead of like an organic growth? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So would you still get the same money? It was the kind of thing that involved Howard Stern at Sirius XM. So, well, if the number of people watching this show is, say, let's say 5,000, you get this much. Okay, now that time comes up, instead of 5,000, the number has multiplied. This time, it wasn't organic growth. It multiplied simply because the company acquired another company that brought in those many people. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
So the question was, are you still entitled to that money, even if, they simply increased the numbers because of acquisition, not because of organic growth of you increasing the viewership? So those are the things, the kinds of language you need in a contract to protect yourself. So when it comes to those contracts where you are dealing with corporations and stuff, yeah, that's sort of what it involves. But in terms of when you get fired, yeah, I mean, if you are making that kind of high dollar contract, yeah, you can probably win some stipulation for cause, getting fired for cause, because it's a multi-year, it goes on for a number of years, there's a lot of money involved. So yeah, that's different. But if you're just a guy doing a gig, let's say at the Gotham or, Comedy Cellar, for instance, a lot of times it's just more like an at-will contract. And, you can leave or they can tell you to leave. So that kind of stuff. But where comedians get their biggest protection is with respect to free speech. I mean, it's so difficult to win against a comedian. First of all, like
in America.
In America. In Canada,
yeah,
you could.
Canada, not so much, yeah.
No, not so much. I mean, I have a case here where a guy took a shot at a disabled kid and they made him pay thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Something that could never happen
we all know that case here.
Mike Ward, it could never happen here. Another case I have here from Germany. Somebody insulted the leader of Turkey, saying that that he watches child porn and had sex with goats, that kind of stupid stuff, he said. Well, he almost went to prison for insulting a foreign leader. Again, something that in this country could never happen. So America, because of the First Amendment, it makes us completely different from other societies. And ultimately, it is the best place you could be a comedian. So that.
Well, I mean, stand-up comedy is an American art that started here first. A lot of people,
Boris, I will say, agreed 100% in terms of America, both having those rights and in general, great country. But however, there's something interesting about like the fact that you could, back in the day when America wasn't so true to those values and you had, your Lenny Bruce's and stuff, and there was a real like kind of like telling truth to power feeling of it. I wonder, I'm not familiar with this at all, so maybe you have some insight into this. I wonder if in those countries like Canada or, places in Europe where it feels more like a punk rock telling truth to power, because I think in America, you have a lot of John Oliver types where like, no shade really, but that'll pat themselves on the back as if they're telling truth to power when you don't necessarily have that same risk. And so I think in America, you have a lot of people that do political commentary that's not always that funny, but where they feel real proud of themselves for like telling truth to power and kind of compromise for not being so funny, compensate rather for not being so funny, with the idea that they're doing challenging comedy the way Lenny Bruce did, when that's just not really the case today. You know, they're not really risking shit compared to somebody in Canada who's like, yeah, he's maybe not doing the smartest joke making fun of a handicap kid or whatever, but he's actually challenging the government in Canada because he actually has the risk of getting arrested or getting a fine for it. You don't have that so much in America. I wonder if comedy suffers a little bit from it even.
Um, say is a disadvantage. Frankly, is a big advantage. I mean, look, if you could say the kinds of things you could say here and get away with that. I mean, if you say half some of the things you say here freely in places like even Canada, you're in for it. Imagine China. I mean, I had a guy come to
Oh,
one of our.
I was born in one of those places, so you definitely don't gotta tell me.
I mean, so I mean, if you in some places you have to submit your material to censors, official censors. So I mean, if you deviate from the script, yeah, you're like totally in a harm's way. So, but in this country, though, I mean, I don't think that's a problem because it allows comedy to be free and true to its form. I mean, look, I mean, stand up is a beautiful, monological, art form. You go where the thing is, where the fun is, where the joke is, without worrying so much about the government, taking you down and stuff. I mean, look, um, it's better now than in Lenny Bruce's time. I mean, Lenny Bruce, he said he got in trouble, got convicted. He died a convicted, a convict, a criminal convict. When he died in 1966, he was still, the conviction hadn't been overturned. But the things he got in trouble for, talking about sex and religion and things like that, in ways that people thought, were like disrespectful and dirty and things, today is nothing. You could do like it goes back to what you just said. You said that today is totally nothing. I mean, the other countries you mentioned, America was like that in the 1960s. Lenny Bruce even George Carlin got arrested. I don't know if one story that Carlin told where Lenny Bruce got arrested and then George Carlin himself got arrested too, and then he got put in the same police vehicle where Lenny Bruce was. Then he told Lenny Bruce about, Lenny Bruce asked him, what are you doing here? He told him, well, I was saying the same thing you were saying. Bruce told him that he was being an idiot, that kind of thing. But it was like that back in the day in this country, like a generation ago, when people didn't think much of comedy, it was just fun and games, and it was
Let me
around that
ask you
time.
let me ask you this: I think one of the major things that comedians, like to protect, I'm sure Boris will agree, is stealing jokes.
Oh,
People getting jokes from others, or so I want to say copyright, but a lot of it's not copyrighted, obviously. It's like you go to a club, like Boris can elaborate more on that. You could go to a club, you hear somebody saying a joke, or you have the idea of the joke and you twist it a little bit, it becomes yours. Or I see a lot of like European comedians will take old material American comedian and they will switch it up to their language and do their own. A lot of, not only like in Europe, around the world, actually, they get a lot of like old material, and even like I see a lot of very, very new comics, try to get like George Carlin stuff or stuff like that. And so Boris, you want to elaborate on that a little bit, and then we can ask Carl, like, how do you protect yourself? How can you? Is there any way that you can? Because I think this is one of the major problems for comics and comedians.
I guess I think it's definitely well, the advice always to comics is to just kind of like put your head down and keep writing. Because if you're a guy that's like doesn't have a TV special and you're in the club and somebody who's got Comedy Central connects and whatever, it's just like there's really not a lot you can do. It sucks. It sucks a lot. And like the people who do it a lot get a reputation among other comics. Even like Robin Williams had a reputation for like you'd turn on a light in the back of the club when he was there, so you knew not to do any material that wasn't out there. But like otherwise you kind of like you just if that one joke was going to make your career, you're not really going to have that much of a career. So like that's the unfortunate reality of it, is that like I don't know if there's a lot legally. I'll just add to what I said before though, in a parallel, and I 100% agree. it's obviously better to do comedy in America. I just mean from like a kind of punk rock standpoint, it's kind of like how weed is legal now and everybody smokes weed and it's just not as cool in some ways as it was. Or like, you know that song, what's that classic, When It Was Wrong? Do you know that song? Do you remember? It's about like hooking up and like how it felt better when it was like hiding out in the back of the bleachers when it was wrong, and then now that it's okay and like we're
Right.
married or whatever, it's not so fun. And so same thing that like, yeah, I mean, it's cool doing politics, but people for 4 years under Trump were patting themselves on the back for calling him an orange pig or whatever. And like, John Oliver got sued, but your average like Vice writer or like somebody at, Broadway Comedy Club or whatever that's calling Trump orange clown is not, they're not speaking any truth to power. So I just mean like it felt like Lenny Bruce was punk rock. And there's a reason we talk about Lenny Bruce. And it's precisely because he had the risk and reality of getting arrested for it.
Right.
And so I feel like now, in order to be punk rock, you have to have completely different avenues than simply like calling Joe Biden an old idiot or calling Trump an orange clown or whatever. It takes a lot more, which is cool. It takes more talent. It takes more. Only in America can you have someone evolve beyond that because you have so much freedom.
Now, it's interesting. You should mention that, like comedy, the stealing of jokes in comedy is like an old industry problem. I mean, it's been there, people shouldn't do it, but they do it. You see, it comes down to the role of gatekeepers, gatekeepers. I mean, the bookers who book shows at clubs and places. I mean, like, if you are a known joke thief, yeah, they may not book you if you steal jokes from other comedians and stuff. So that kind of industry self-regulation, blackballing bad actors, yeah, that remains the most effective way in comedy. Because if you look at the copyright laws, they don't protect comedy as much as they protect things like music or movies. For instance, look, in a comedy joke, you have the punchline, then you have the setup. Okay, so the setup, very important because, the punchline comes from the setup. You could get a lot of things from just the setup. Now, the punchline is just something that follows, as a matter of course. In comedy, nobody protects the setup. In the movies, setup is kind of like equivalent to like the plot. You don't steal the plot of a movie. No, you'll be breaching some copyright law. So comedy lacks that kind of effective protection. And then with respect to the punchline, all you have to do to not get in trouble for stealing the punchline is to just vary the thing a little bit. If the punchline ends with ABC, you can say, XYZ. That little variation can keep you in the clear from, accusations of, copyright infringement. But like, I have in the book, the other thing you mentioned, which is very, very pertinent, is this thing about smaller actors being like scooped by bigger people with larger microphones, like the cases I have here. I mean, I'm not trying to accuse Conan O'Brien or Michael Shea. They have cases I cover here where, smaller act, in the case of Conan, somebody made a joke on Twitter. He said that the same evening after his joke, he made his joke in the morning about the Washington Monument, suffering shrinkage, that kind of thing. The same evening, Conan O'Brien makes the same joke on his show. So this guy got pissed off and said, well, that was actually my joke. Why would you make the joke? So pay me. He sued Conan. Pay me for using my joke, copyright infringement.
Well, just to, not to defend Conan, but, there is a possibility that people think alike in a way. And also there's writers in the show. Like, but people see when they see Conan or somebody is like saying just the show, it's not them writing every day for everything. There's writers, there's a writing room, there's a head writer, there's writers, and they write jokes. They give him the monologue. He can add stuff to it if he wants to, if he have jokes if he wants to. But and also I have seen people saying the same jokes, even with they don't know each other. So I mean, not because you just wrote it, that doesn't mean, especially in Twitter. Like, do you follow him in Twitter so he can steal that? You know what I'm saying?
It's sort of an interesting spider web of implications. Like, yeah, on the one hand, it's like if you have 100 followers on Twitter, what are the odds of Conan is looking at your Twitter? But also, like, there are, like, let's say it was one of Conan's writers that actually did steal it. And I mean, that sounds like it'd be pretty difficult to prove. But if you could somehow prove it, that writer, Conan's technically liable for what his writers do on the
Yes,
show.
obviously.
If the writers don't own the material they write for the show, which I'm sure they don't, that means the show is also liable for that material if it owns that material. But the other thing I was going to say, because stand-up's obviously a little bit different than writing for a show in particular, stand-up in general obviously is like an effervescent art form. Like even watching video of stand-up isn't the purest form of what stand-up is. It's live and in person. And so, like, the other thing, these are like not legal advice, but comedy advice, that like what people always say is keep your head down and keep writing. But also, the premise can overlap in terms of if your material is dating in New York is hard, there's going to be thousands of other people that have that same setup. If your setup is, it's weird having balls or whatever, there's going to be other male comics that have that same setup. So the other advice for a lot of people that they say is, write a specific to yourself. Like I'm an immigrant from Ukraine who's married with a baby, and like how many other Ukrainian comics that are married with a baby are living in Brooklyn?
Mhm.
Two. It's actually two. I know two, but otherwise there's
So,
not that many,
yeah.
and we all follow each other on Twitter. So we'll
Mhm.
know if somebody steals from one or the other.
Yeah, it's interesting you should mention that. I mean, first of all, Hatem talks about, maybe comedians that if you have a similar joke, it doesn't necessarily mean that you stole from, there's something they call parallel thought.
Right.
Parallel thought, because, comedians kind of look at the world more similarly to each other than to the rest of us, than the rest of us. So, two comedians can see the same thing and kind of look at it the same, broadly, similarly, than somebody who's not a comedian. So there's that parallel thought there. That's why in a place like comedy, it becomes super important that you show that the other person at least had the occasion to see your joke. If it's a joke on Twitter, then, well, everybody has access to Twitter.
Yeah,
So
and
one,
if you
you have
post
to.
it there, it's kind of like, okay, this is like, you're a Twitter. But I do see some comedians try, like when they think of something, they post it like on social media to kind of prove like, hey, I said that at that time.
Mhm.
So it's okay. But also I've seen like it's very hard. Well, I've seen where people like in one show I'll be watching and the comic will go and talk about something. In a joke, and then somebody else come 3 sets in the same show and say the same thing or similar to it,
Mhm.
and it's not stealing, I think. But here's the thing, to me, is like if there is, like, say, if Boris is a political comedian, he always talk about politics, he always talk about like Trump, he always talk about this, and he comes and say a joke at Trump that somebody else maybe said, it's like, okay, maybe they thought the same thing. But if Boris only talk about sex, never talked about politics and stuff like that, and then he took, I'll be like, okay, interesting. And the other thing is, like, even in baseball, like I remember in sports in general, when they used to like have steroids and stuff like that, it's like, oh, he took steroids. Yeah, so what? But he make $300 million, So what's the punishment after? Like, there's some very famous comedians that, were known for stealing jokes, and stole joke, and then they're interviewed years later. It's like, yeah, I did. So what? Get over it. I wrote. Uh, so it is a tough world to that,
Yeah,
and that's why I have a lot of respect to comedy specifically for that reason. It's like it
mhm.
used to be when I first like being around comedy. It used to be like they told me that the rules is like whoever says it in TV first, that's their joke.
It's
So you
true.
need to be able to get in TV. I mean, that
You
was
need to get it. You need
when
to be able
TV
to
was the
get.
TV.
You need to be able to get it out first. But the thing is, though, I mean, it's possible to get busted for joke stealing, and frankly, the the best way to like protect yourself now is to be creative in a different way. Like you make what they call observational comedy, which is all the rage now. You talk about yourself, like Boris said, how many other people have his own experiences, the kind of experiences he has. So only Boris could talk about those kinds of experiences. So I mean, if you stole a joke that he made about his experiences, then it becomes very obvious that you've taken the joke from him. But if you simply are making a joke that is in the very common area, a political comedy joke, like you're talking about Donald Trump or Joe Biden, all that stuff, yeah, it could be easily stolen. Well, it could be taken, not necessarily by being stolen, but people could also like think along the same lines as yourself. So the most effective way to like stay away from the rat race is to do observational comedy that focuses on your own background, your own experiences, your own peculiarities. So, I mean, if you're able to do that, yeah, then you're better shielded from, the actions of joke thieves. But the other one I mentioned here was a case of a Michael Shea from SNL. Again, like jokes that are posted on social media. Some girl who does jokes on TikTok, who talks about a home girl that comes in to help people solve their problems. So she made those jokes. And then Michael Shea made the same jokes or broadly similar jokes, on his own, platform. Some HBO thing that HBO Max show that he had. So she sues him, say, well, you took this thing from me. Again, I need to get paid. Well, that one is still pending, but the one from Conan O'Brien settled. O'Brien walked away.
They paid out? The Conan one paid out?
Yeah, they paid out, yeah. I mean, he
Well,
didn't admit
I just want to say a
liability.
couple of things for that. One, because Michael Shea, and a lot of and not just knowing somebody, I think you could tell that again, he's the head writer. There's writers under him, but he's not, from my experience, not that kind of guy that things. And the other thing is with with the settling cases, we all know, especially those who have businesses, especially in production or in restaurants and stuff, settling does not mean that you agree. Settling, that means it's a business decision. No, I'm just saying to the audience that
I will say,
it's a business decision to save more money. Like if Boris claimed that I did something to him, like I hit him or something, and it's gonna cost me $20,000 just to go to court and close my shop and do this or do that, or pay him $5,000, it's a business decision. Some people that have a lot of money will be like, you know what, I stick to my rules, but a business decision to settle, that doesn't mean that this is true,
To say this.
And for somebody like, like I said, like Michael Shea, you see him all the time. We know him, we see him for years. If somebody have that thing of stealing, it would appear, especially for somebody you see him all the time.
Yeah, he definitely does not have that reputation.
Yeah, it's not going to be, he's not going to go to TikTok. I don't think he have time to go to, or he look for jokes in TikTok. I think it could be vice versa. And I think it should, maybe the other person that did it and then say it. But anyway, I think that
let me add one thing though. There is also an adverse incentive, and particularly for the latest generation of comics that kind of live on Twitter and live on these social media platforms, where there is a currency of victimhood and a currency of being wronged that you're able to either monetize literally or monetize in terms of an audience. There's an adverse incentive where like a normal person might look at this joke you made on Twitter and look at the joke Michael Shea or whoever else made and be like, it feels to me really reasonable that this is parallel thinking. It's very unlikely that this guy's following you, whatever, but there's still an incentive to sue because now you have your name. You're a comedian who's been doing it 2 years. No one gives a shit about you. All of a sudden, there's now a Gawker article about how you're suing Michael Shea. Now you're officially a comedian, according to this journalist in Gawker. You've got Google results all of a sudden for something that has nothing to do with you being funny, and there's now this incentive to milk that on the internet, and it could do more for your career than the other people who are actually producing comedy.
Now, two things there. I have two things to say to that. Number one, first of all, Conan O'Brien settled. He did not admit that he stole the joke. So like Hatem said, it probably was a business decision, to like just make this thing go away, get on with business. This guy is just some guy from wherever, trying to like come into my space and things. So he settled. He didn't admit liability. And then the other one is what he just said. there's this perverse incentive, you know, that people might have to like go mix it up with some big name guy, you know, some bold faced name that, you know, people are talking about. So they talk about both of you in the same sentence, in the same context. So it kind of enhances you, right? If you like,
Exactly.
yeah, imagine if you sue Donald Trump, for instance. Today you sue Donald Trump. I mean, you become some big guy in the news, you know. So it's that kind of dynamic that happens. So
Did I
it
sue
comes back
Donald
to,
Trump? Do you
yeah,
want to
exactly.
do you want to represent me? Let's make a name for both of us.
Exactly. So I mean, so it's kind of part of what I'm talking about in this book, that lawsuits today have become almost the cost of doing business, that people sue you for all sorts of reasons. Some are aggrieved genuinely, others are doing it strategically, others are doing it for the perverse incentive that you mentioned, you know, to like raise their profile, you know, by antagonizing you know, a nationally known figure, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a crazy space these days that, you know, it's a crazy situation these days with respect to comedy and the lawsuits and, you know, stuff of that nature. In a place like America that is, you know, addicted to suits.
So let me ask you a few questions about, you know, a quick question. If it's like, okay, you can get in trouble or can't get in trouble. Like, okay, comedian, like I just give you different scenarios, and Boris, feel free to jump in with scenarios when you like. Comedians making fun of somebody in the crowd of a comedy club. You know, so a comedy, you know, a customer who's walking, want to the show, go sit, and you make fun of whatever, you know, they are, you know, their background, their look, whatever, like their ethnicity, their, you know, directly to them. And scenario number two, if you say something that offends them in general, is there any ground for lawsuits, winnable lawsuits there?
Well, two things. First, you may get in trouble with the mob, you know, the woke intimidators and the council, you know, culture contingent, you know, who might feel maybe you're punching down. And, you know, so they might badmouth you. And if you're not strong enough in comedy, they could even maybe cancel you and things like that. So that's what you have to worry about, the court of public opinion.
Yeah.
But in terms of the law, the regular law courts and, you know, the law that we talk about, everyday law, no.
So
First of all,
does club have to say like I mean, you are entering a comedy club, kind of like you go to the bar, it's like I got drunk, you know. So does the comedy clubs have any liability? Should they protect themselves? Like, hey, this is a free speech venue. I mean, it is known that it's for a free speech venue.
Sort of
If
a
it's, you know,
foreseeable consequence of
yeah.
going to a comedy
You know,
club.
well,
I know, like when we film stuff, like if I have a show somewhere and I'm filming, we say at the door and they will have signs and we say the tickets, you know, uh, this show will be filming. So, you know, you don't want to bring somebody you're cheating with, you know what I'm saying? Stuff
right.
like that. So that's the right. But
And
I have another one. What about all the, you know, the videos that we see on TikTok or, you know, people wearing body cam and interacting with people who don't know that they're in cameras, you know, but they do it anyway. Is that like, and they say like, I feel like every time, like when they're filming a cop even, and the cop says, stop filming, is like, you're outside, I have the right to do that. Is that the thing? Like, can you film anybody that's walking the street, or can you be filmed in another way?
It depends on the state, right? New York is one party consent.
no, but if you're in a public space, you know, if you're out there in the public space, I don't know that you can stop people from, you know, filming you or talking about you or seeing you. But you're talking about like more like invasion of privacy. You know, somebody can like come into your place and start filming you, or I mean, or maybe there is a nightclub or a comedy club where you say, well, no filming allowed. So if it's that kind of situation, yeah, then you cannot film. But
No, I'm talking
if
more
it's,
about the TikToks and you know, pranking people and stuff like that on the street. Like you can just wear a body
Those
camera
people are
and just
getting shot now.
could do
For
I
that. Yeah,
know.
you could
TikTok.
do that.
In New
But I
York,
mean,
in your country, they got shot. I saw that candid camera.
you could do that unless, I
In
mean,
Russia, I saw that poor kid that got shot.
I cover a case in the book where there's a guy in Florida who gives wedges. You know, wedges where you
Mm-hmm.
reach into somebody's
Yeah.
pants and
Yeah,
bunch
I
up
will
their
not feel
undies.
bad for that guy when he gets shot.
So he gives people all, wedges and things. And of course, that was different because, that was like an assault.
Yeah.
That's a practical joke.
Mhm.
So he got some prison time for, that, even though he didn't really solve the thing. But yeah, they charged him. But, the situation, you mentioned this situation where the responsibility of comedy clubs for people's actions in there. Well, if the comedian commits what they call a tort, some violation, then yeah, it becomes his problem, but not the comedy club's problem. I mean, I have a case in the book. I don't know if you guys know this comedian name of Andy Dick.
Yeah, of course.
All right, so Andy Dick, he goes to a show where he was performing, and then he was wearing like a skirt and no underwear while he was performing, right?
Andy
So
Dick's
one time,
famous for this behavior.
yeah. So as he performed, things got charged up and hot and heavy. So he comes down, and then he was walking down the aisle, toward the back of the room. And then some fan who was sitting near the aisle asked him for an autograph. So Andy stopped, grabbed the guy's head and shoved it in his bare crotch. Just so silly stuff, And then the guy was so offended. The guy, then he sued the nightclub. So he sued the comedy club, and then he sued Andy Dick. What do you guys think? Let me just give you a little quick. What do you think would happen? Who would be liable there?
Did the guy's face like actually touch Andy Dick's penis?
His
Oh, well,
face.
that's assault, right? That's got to be a sexual assault. And I think
Okay.
Andy Dick's been charged with sexual assault in other contexts as
That's a
well.
different, that's, but this was
Not
a performance. This was at a performance, where he was
right,
actually
but you don't get
performing.
to assault audiences at a performance, right?
All right. So yeah, how about the club? What do you think would happen? Would the club be liable?
I don't think
Hmm.
so.
I hope not, but I can see it happening.
Well, the club was sued too, but you're right. He's not gonna get the club because the club is not gonna. Somebody mentioned foreseeability, reasonable expectation. Yeah, you wouldn't. A comedian is performing. You wouldn't expect him to like go and start violating people's rights in that way. So it's not something you could hold them liable for.
Yeah.
It's not within. It's not within the things you could expect. From that kind of show. So it's an intentional act. If it's like something done out of negligence, then you could hold the club liable. But this was an intentional act. A comedian decides to just break the law against somebody else. There was no way that the comedy club could have stopped him. I mean, they didn't know what was in his head just before he did that thing. So
Yeah.
you couldn't.
Yeah. No,
But
yeah, I think that there is a lot of like little things like we said, a lot of people try to, use the law to get either, recognition. And that's what I think is like, I think that a lot of times it should be, if this law becomes, if your lawsuit is not right, I think you should be liable for the fees and insurance and attorney of the other party that you accused, and you have no ground, of accusing
well,
except that.
it's like that in some countries, but not here. In
Yeah.
this country, the American rule, everybody pays his or her way, unless there's some contract where you provide for attorney's fees. If you don't have that kind of provision, then you eat your own cost. But let me ask you one more thing. Like one case I covered here, George Wallace. See if you guys, the comedian George Wallace, he was performing at the Bellagio, right? He had a residency and he was performing, and then he tripped on a wire. He fell and injured his Achilles heel, and was out for a while. What do you think would happen? You think the venue will be responsible for that?
Did he sue the venue?
Of course. Well, that's why it's in the book. Every case here is a lawsuit.
Okay, so sued the venue for what? It
He sued the
depends on
venue for
what the suing.
his
If it's,
injuries. No, his injuries.
yeah, I mean, if I think if he can prove that, I think it's the venue will be reliable for it, liable for it if the wires wasn't set into the industrial, level of
All right,
garbage.
you're right. You're right. He won over $1 million for that.
Yeah. Yeah,
He's
I
one of
mean,
the,
these things is like, I think if you like, I know if you like, let's say you walk off a stage and you tripped, in a regular stairs, that's really not on you. But if there is something, an objective or something for the production that
Mhm.
you were not trained to do it, that's why we have like a, pre-production, like walk off and stuff like that with comedians, like, okay, there's a wire here, there's things here. And these things are usually filmed, so they know. So
Now you're thinking like a trial lawyer.
I've been through a lot.
Yeah, now you're thinking like a trial lawyer.
But I, yeah, it's very funny. I would like, what about, okay, what about, we saw this this a lot recently. Somebody like, let's say the Will Smith. So here's a question. This should be fun. The Will Smith Chris Rock incident.
Mhm.
Now there were Chris was at a stage, the Oscars, obviously, and Will Smith's went on stage
Close
and
to.
assaulted him. So what is can Chris, if he wants, I know he didn't want to, but if he wants to, can he sue the Oscars, and can he sue the venue, and he can sue Will Smith?
No, no. Well, it comes back to sort of what we just discussed, like intentional acts. Will Smith, Chris Rock could sue the Oscars if, all the Oscars had reason to know that Will Smith would behave that way, and they let him do it anyway. In other words, you'll be suing them for negligence. But if Will Smith went in there, just as a guest, and then while he was there, he decides on his own, right there, to go up to the stage and commit this act, very intentional act. In other words, it was not foreseeable when they let him, in the Oscars to go sit down, get a seat, become a guest,
Let me ask
that
you a
he would
better
behave
one
in this
then.
way.
Can he sue the security company?
No. Again, same thing. It's an intentional act.
No,
Intentional.
but your
Intentional.
security company is the one providing that no one gets near you.
Okay, that's different. That's
Yeah.
different. If there is, yeah, but I mean, if you have to prove that,
See, I can be a lawyer.
you can be, you're thinking like a
Well,
trial
it
lawyer.
seems weird because it's not a rando rushing up. Like, it's also not foreseeable to security that Will
It's
Smith is
just it's
about to commit
difficult
an
to
assault.
sue. The only person you could sue would be
Will
Will Smith,
Smith.
obviously. Yeah, obviously.
And
Okay,
maybe
what about
Jada
that?
Pinkett. And maybe Jada Pinkett because she's pulling all the strings, really.
What about the guy that
No,
attacked Dave Chappelle? Can you sue I think that's a case for, I mean, Dave have his own security, obviously, but
They beat the shit out of that guy.
oh yeah, so yeah, that's a good question. So can that guy sue them for getting beat,
I bet he'll
after the
try.
fact?
or if they be well, now you're getting into a very difficult area. He could always sue them, but again, if they use excessive force, then it could become a problem. Or if they used force that they didn't have to use, I mean, you don't have to beat him up just because he was trying to get into a scuffle. I mean, your
He had a
job is to
knife,
protect.
though. I think
Well,
he
yeah.
had a
So you
knife.
could take the knife away from him, or if you have to use violence to get the knife away from him, if you could show that he was threatening somebody, he he posed the danger of imminent harm to somebody. So
Yeah.
unless you could prove those kinds of intricate circumstances, otherwise you cannot use that kind of force. And especially, first of all, if you're a security guard, you don't have as much authority as the cops to do some things, so you can exactly use that kind of violence.
Yeah.
So yeah, they could get sued for
I'm
excessive.
asking all these questions because I'm planning to attack Boris later on tonight on stage. So I'm getting my information to know what's gonna happen. And
Well, yeah, now you're getting the advice, be careful out there.
so before we wrap it up, just to sum up for the book, like who do you think this book could work for? Like who should be reading this book, and
Oh,
what's the top three things that they can like obviously you mentioned a lot of scenarios in your book of comedians and examples of lawsuits, which is good because you can learn from these things. But who is this book for, and what's the three top things that people could learn from that book?
thanks. I appreciate that question. So the book primarily is for comedians, especially both, frankly, comedians at every stage of the game, both those coming in and those who have attained, stardom. because it covers, it gives you a 360 degree of the kinds of stuff you could encounter. And most of the folks who are covered in this book, they are, very, famed celebrities who have made fame and money, but they have all these issues. And, like I said, because of what comedy has become today, something where you could make money and celebrity, which something that has become very important in the pop culture, then comedy has come into the crosshairs of America's litigious society. It has become the shiny new thing for people, filing lawsuits. So yeah, so this is for every comedian out there, folks who might wish to ride your coattails to fame. These are ways you could protect yourself, beginning from when you make the contract to, what you can say and stay safe, and, how to protect your joke. First of all, your joke today is like money. What Louis C.K. said one time, I think in 2011, that every new generation of jokes he makes is like his money, like a farmer's annual crop, money in the bank. Yeah, that's what jokes have become today. So to protect your joke, it's something you want to pay close attention to. And if you're a new comic, yeah, you don't want to get into comedy without reading a book like this, because it kind of lays out the landscape for you in terms of, what you have to avoid. Because, these days, with the new phenomenon of lawsuits as a new cost of doing business, doing comedy today has become sort of like walking through a minefield in our culture today, in a litigious society like America, even though we have a lot of freedom under the First Amendment. But still, the environment out there today is very choppy, with lawsuits and other dangers lurking for a comedian. So first, the book is a must read for comedians. Now, for other people who are not comedians, who care about the First Amendment and the legacy of free speech that we enjoy in this society, which sets us apart from other societies like Canada and all these other places where you could get in trouble for doing things that nobody here would even consider problematic. So if you care about those things, comedians are like people on the front lines of free speech in America today, because they say the most offensive things. And if you could protect people who say the most offensive things, people who fly closest to the sun, then it means you could protect all the rest of us. So, I mean, like Elon Musk said one time that free speech means nothing unless you're willing to accord the right of free speech to people you don't like, who might say things that you don't like. So comedians are like our proxies in the fight over free speech. If they lose, we lose. So we have a dog in the fight, the comedians. Those of us who are not comedians, who care about free speech, this wonderful legacy and gift that sets us apart from other societies. So yeah.
And if
so
any
that would be
comedians get sued, they can just contact you. Yeah, they can contact.
Oh yeah, they can do that. But the thing is,
do you do contracts as well?
Yeah. Now here's the thing. If you don't read any chapter in this book, if you just have time to read only one chapter in this book, read the chapter on free speech. It's the biggest chapter here. It covers, I mean, one reviewer said, if your name is not in this book, then you're not important in comedy. I wouldn't go so fast to say that, but there are lots of folks who are covered in this book. But yeah, so the second chapter on free speech, if you have time to read only just one chapter, read that. I mean, it's the biggest chapter here. It really lays out the roadmap for you to.
Yeah, I can wait to read it. And last question, unless Boris, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's what it looks like. Comedy goes to court when people stop laughing and start fighting.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you have, I don't know if Boris have a final question, but is there a definition for comedian or no? So I understand you are on a comedy club stage, you are a comedian, but I'm saying, like, let's say you're in a wedding, you're in a concert, because, a lot of people, you're on TikTok, a lot of people say, like, oh, I'm a comedian. Do you get protected under free speech for these things, for TikTok, for, social media, stuff like that? Is that a free speech?
Well, comedy is not like law where you have to have a license to practice law.
Yeah,
comedy is like maybe
I think
You
it
want
should
to
be.
be.
It's
Well,
like journalism.
it's kind of like being a journalist. You don't have to be licensed to be a journalist. So a journalist, you can say, well, who is a journalist? Who could get a pass to a public event where journalists are allowed to cover the event? Well, it comes down to what the conditions are for granting that kind of pass. So, but you don't have a license like a lawyer. I mean, if a lawyer has a license, then he or she has an automatic right to be in a courtroom.
Yeah.
To have a license. So comedy is not like that. But who is a comedian? Well, comedians make people, they are there to render jokes, to get a laugh and things like that. So if somebody is believed to be a comedian, I guess it comes down to what the public thinks of a particular person's activity. So if they consider you a comedian, yeah. In terms of the First Amendment and the protections of free speech, of course, if you're a comedian, you get those protections, even if you're not a comedian, but you say things that are protected under the First Amendment. Yeah, free speech. Yeah.
All right. Boris, you have a question before we go?
No, that was all very interesting.
All right. So comedy goes to court. Comedy goes to court when people stop laughing and start fighting. I'll leave a link to the book in the description of this episode. Boris, you want to leave your information where people can find you and follow you and all that?
Sure, at the Boris K online. And when does this come out?
Tuesday.
Oh, cool. So March 6th, I'll be in Hoboken at Mulligan's Pub. And then March 21st, 22nd, 24th, I'll be in Napa for the Napa Valley Comedy Festival. You could check out the schedule online and all that. But yeah, that Thursday, I'll be at the Napa Valley Performing Arts Center. Friday, I'll be at Downtown Joe's. And Sunday, I'll be at Napa Garden.
Wonderful. And if you want to read more about these issues, you can go to my blog, ocarslaw.com.
Okay, ocarslaw.com. And
ocarslaw.com, yeah.
I'll also leave the the information in the description, and you can email us at liveformamerica@comedycellar.com. Noam will be back next week, and next week, surprisingly, we have speaking of this, we have one of the head writers for John Oliver show, so should be
ask him about this.
it should be interesting. Yeah, so I'll ask him about this for sure. Well, guys, thank you so much, and have a great night, and talk soon. Noam will be back next week. Can't wait.